The pack bullies thought they had finally won. Lena lay face down in the snow, motionless, blood from her split lip melting small, dark holes in the white ground around her. 3 of them stood over her, Brix, Calla's twin brother Ren, breathing hard in the cold air, breath rising in short, satisfied clouds. Behind them 12 more watched, not helping, not stopping it, just watching. This was the order of things in Ironcliff Pack. Everyone knew it. Everyone had known it for years. The Alpha King's back was turned, because the Alpha King's back was always turned when it came to things like this. And just as Brix raised his boot, just as that final, permanent line was about to be crossed, the circle broke. Not at the edges, not cautiously, from the inside. Ironcliff Pack had a hierarchy the way a building has load-bearing walls. Not ornamental, structural, and maintained with violence when necessary. At the top, Alpha Doran Voss. 43 years old, broad as a doorway. The kind of Alpha who had consolidated power so thoroughly over 20 years that questioning him had simply stopped happening. Not because people agreed with everything he did, because the people who hadn't agreed were now somewhere else, which was Ironcliff's language for gone, in the way that left gaps where names used to be. Below Doran, his inner council, 7 betas who had survived the consolidation by being useful and loyal in that order. Below the council, the pack proper. Several hundred wolves organized into the usual strata. The warrior class, the hunters, the craftspeople, the healers, the young. At the bottom, the Omegas. In some packs, Omega status was simply a biological designation. A rank within a broader system that didn't mean much more than a particular set of strengths and vulnerabilities. In some packs. In Ironcliff, it meant something specific and consistent and cruel in the administrative way that Mira, if she had ever encountered it, would have recognized immediately. Not dramatic cruelty, not theatrical, just the kind that accrues interest over time, that compounds daily, that is so embedded in the structure that even the people inflicting it have stopped noticing they're doing it. Omegas in Ironcliff were assigned the work no one else wanted. They were housed in the outer ring of the settlement, furthest from the warmth of the communal fires, closest to the wind off the northern ridge. They ate after everyone else had eaten. They were addressed last in any gathering, if they were addressed at all. And they were under no formal rule, but with the specific reliability of things that don't need to be written down, available for the entertainment of anyone who ranked above them, which was everyone. Lena had been in Ironcliff for 4 years. She had come at 19, following an older Omega woman who had offered her a place. Her name was Des, and she had been kind, and she had died in a hunting accident in Lena's 2nd year, and after that, Lena had been entirely alone in the specific way that people are alone when they are surrounded by others who have agreed, collectively, not to see them. She was not the only Omega in Ironcliff. There were 9 of them. They helped each other in the ways that people who share a category of disadvantage help each other, practically quietly, without making a show of it because showing was dangerous. But their help had limits that were set by the structure they were inside. No one could carry someone else if they were already carrying everything they could manage. Lena's particular position at the bottom of the bottom had solidified around Brix. Brix was 26, a mid-tier warrior, the kind of person whose rank was high enough to grant immunity, but not high enough to provide real authority, a position that tends to generate a specific type of personality. He had targeted Lena with the focused attention of someone who needed to feel large and had identified the most efficient method available. It had started with small things, slights. Her food portion, already minimal, further reduced. Her assigned work doubled when he was on oversight duty. Deliberate physical contact in passing. Not enough to formally report? Never enough. Always calibrated precisely to the line. Calla and Ren had followed his lead because they always followed the lead of whoever seemed safest to follow, which is the specific cowardice of people who tell themselves they're merely practical. 4 years of small things, compounding. On the morning that everything changed, it was not a small thing. It had started with the water. Lena's assignment for the week was water carrying. The heavy wooden yokes, 2 buckets each, from the stream at the settlement's eastern edge to the communal kitchen, 6 trips, morning and evening. It was work she had done before and was capable of doing. It was also, in this particular week, in this particular cold, with the ground frozen and the path between the stream and the kitchen glazed with black ice, she had mentioned to the work coordinator 3 days ago, and that had not been sanded. It was a trap she hadn't set, but was going to fall into regardless. She fell on the 3rd trip. The ice gave her no warning. One moment she was moving, the next the ground was not where it was supposed to be, and she went down hard on her side, the yoke cracking against the ice, both buckets going, water soaking her immediately in the specific cold that takes your breath before you've decided to give it. She lay there for a moment, gasping. Around her, people passed. Not everyone. Not most people. But enough people that someone should have stopped, and the number who did was 0, which told her something she already knew, but which still, after 4 years, still landed. She got herself up. She was used to getting herself up. What she was not entirely prepared for was Brix, who had seen it from 20 meters away, and had been waiting for something like this the way people who need things wait for things. "Omega down," he announced to no one and everyone, with the particular pleasure of someone who has found today's entertainment and intends to make it last. Better clean that up before someone slips. She was soaked. The temperature was well below freezing. She needed to get dry and warm, and she needed to do it quickly. But her quarters were on the far side of the settlement, and between her and them stood Brix, Calla, and Wren, who had arranged themselves with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this before. "Where are you going?" Calla said. Not a real question. "She should finish the carry first," Wren said. "The kitchen needs water." "I'll do the next trip after I change," Lena said. Her voice was even. She had learned to keep it even. "I need to get dry before—" "The kitchen needs water," Brix said. Same words, different weight. She looked at him. He was smiling in the way that had no warmth in it. "Brix," she said. "It's below freezing. I'm soaked. I need 10 minutes to—" "You'll get those buckets filled," he said, "or I'll report that you abandoned your assignment." She looked at him for a long moment. She turned and went back to the stream. She did not make it to the kitchen on the 4th trip. The cold had been doing its work since the fall, which is what cold does when you give it the opportunity, methodical, patient, thorough. By the time she had refilled the buckets and started back, her hands had lost precision and her legs were not reliable, and she was using a significant amount of concentration simply to maintain upright. She made it halfway. Then she didn't. She went down at the edge of the central square, not a quiet corner, not somewhere private. The center of the pack's daily life, where people moved in all directions, and the communal fires burned, and children ran, and the business of a settled pack went on in its ordinary way. She went down and did not get back up. Not because she didn't try. Because her body had gone past the point where trying was an option that produced results. She was conscious for another few moments, enough to be aware of the cold ground against her face, the distant sounds of the settlement, the boots of someone stopping nearby, and then she was not conscious at all. She didn't know what happened in those first minutes. She learned it later, in pieces, from different mouths. Brix had been the first to reach her. Not to help. He had crouched beside her and checked that she was breathing, which was the minimum that even he wouldn't disregard, and then he had stood up and looked at the people nearby with the expression of someone who has just been handed an opportunity. "She collapsed," he said. "Again." Again was doing work it had no right to do. She had never collapsed before. Calla and Wren had come from somewhere nearby. They always came from somewhere nearby. The 3 of them had arranged themselves in that practiced formation, and the watching had begun. The way watching always began in Ironcliff, the crowd finding its positions, the implicit agreement settling over everyone like weather. No one interfered. No one was going to interfere. This was the order of things. Brix said something to the people around them. She didn't hear it. She was unconscious. But several people repeated it later. He had said that this was what happened when Omegas couldn't manage their assignments, that the pack's resources had been going toward people who couldn't contribute, that someone ought to report this to the Alpha Council. All of this was the scaffolding for what he intended to do next, which was the thing that crossed the line he had been approaching for 4 years. He had gotten close before. He had learned the line well, had calculated precisely where it was. But this morning, with her motionless in the snow and the crowd arranged in its familiar passive formation, and the certainty of years of unchallenged behavior behind him, he had decided the line had moved. Wren saw it in his face, told his sister. She looked away, the specific cowardice of someone who doesn't want to watch, but won't stop it either. Brix raised his boot. What happened next was not one thing. It was 50 things simultaneously in the span of a few seconds. The first was Torin. Torin was a mid-rank hunter, 29 years old, 3 years in Ironcliff. He was not particularly large, not particularly aggressive, not the kind of person who had ever distinguished himself in any direction. He had watched the situation from 40 feet away, with the particular internal conflict of someone who knows what they are watching, and has not yet decided what to do about it. He decided. He moved from where he was standing to where Lena was lying in a straight line, at a pace that was not running, but was not walking, and he placed himself between Brix's raised boot and Lena's unconscious body. He didn't say anything. He just stood there. Brix looked at him with the expression of someone whose arithmetic has suddenly produced the wrong answer. "Move," he said. Torin didn't move. What happened next happened fast. Brix took a step toward Torin, and someone else moved. A woman named Seta, a craftsperson, 40 years old, who had been watching from the edge of the square with her arms crossed, and an expression that suggested she had been adding something up for a long time, and had just arrived at the total. She walked to Torin's side and stood there. Then someone else. Then 3 more. Then, and this was the moment, the specific moment that people would describe later with the particular precision of those who understood they were watching something that would matter. The shift happened in the crowd's quality. The passive formation, the arrangement of watchers who had agreed not to see, broke along invisible lines and reformed as something else entirely. Not all of them. Not even most of them. But enough. Enough that Brix looked up from Torin and saw not a crowd watching him, but a crowd watching him, in the different way, the way that counts weight rather than spectacle. 50 wolves by the accounting done later, standing between him and the unconscious Omega on the ground. Doran Voss was in his council hall when word reached him. He had been reviewing the northern border assessments, which was real work that needed doing, and which he was genuinely engaged with when the messenger came in. He listened to the report with the particular stillness of someone who is aware that their response to this moment is going to be significant regardless of what it is. He had known about Brix. He had known about all of it, the assignments, the small cruelties, the specifically calibrated harassment that everyone in his pack knew about, and no one had formally brought to him, because bringing things formally to Doran Voss required a courage that the structure he had built over 20 years had systematically discouraged. He had told himself that minor social conflicts resolved themselves, that pack hierarchies self-corrected, that his attention was better directed at the actual governance problems that required an alpha's focus. He had told himself these things, and they had been convenient, and they had been, he was understanding now with the specific unpleasantness of a mirror held at an unexpected angle, exactly that, convenient. He went to the square. What he found was this: Lena, still unconscious, in the center. A wolf named Torin crouched beside her now, his cloak removed and wrapped around her. Someone else, he didn't know the name immediately, holding a heating stone that had come from somewhere. The immediate medical response of people who had been waiting for permission to help, and had simply decided, at a certain point, to stop waiting. 50 wolves arranged in a loose semicircle that was not aggressive, not performative, but unmistakably present. Brix, Calla, and Wren at the edge of the square, the specific frozen quality of people who have been caught in the middle of something and are recalculating rapidly. And the crowd, his pack, watching all of it with an attention that had nothing passive in it anymore. Doran Voss stood at the edge of his own square and looked at what his pack had done, and what his pack had allowed, and what it had taken to produce this moment, and he was quiet for a long time. "Take her to the healing house," he said. His voice was very even. Torin looked up at him. There was something in that look, not hostility, not exactly, but a clear-eyed assessment that Doran recognized as the look of someone who has stopped performing deference and is now simply evaluating. "Already planned," Torin said. Doran held his gaze for a moment. "Good," he said. He turned to Brix. What happened to Brix was not fast. It should have been fast. Doran understood this. Looking back, understood that the pattern of small permissions he had extended over years had required correction at each point, and had not received it. What happened to Brix at the end was the accumulated weight of what should have happened earlier, arriving all at once, which was not the same as justice, but was the closest approximation available. Brix was removed from warrior rank, formally, in front of the full council. Calla and Wren were censured, not removed from rank, but formally noted, which in Ironcliff's political language meant a permanent asterisk, a thing that would follow them in every future accounting. The Alpha Council spent 3 days in intensive session after that, which had not happened in 11 years. What came out of it was different from what went in. Lena regained consciousness in the healing house 6 hours after she had gone down in the square. The first thing she was aware of was warmth. Real warmth, the bone-deep kind which told her she had been cold for a long time, and was no longer cold, which was so unfamiliar that she didn't immediately process it. The second thing was that she was not alone. A woman was sitting beside the bed, healer, gray-haired, with the calm, efficient manner of someone who had seen a great deal and had kept practicing regardless. She looked up when Lena's eyes opened and said, "There you are," in the specific tone that combines relief with professionalism. "What?" Lena started. "You collapsed in the square," the healer said. "You've been here 6 hours. You're going to be fine. Drink this." Lena drank. She lay back. She was trying to assemble the fragments of the morning into a sequence that made sense. "Brix," she said. "Is not going to be a problem," the healer said. She said it the way people state things that are already settled. Lena looked at her. "What happened?" the healer told her. "Not everything. The full account came later, in pieces, from different people. But enough." The word 50 landed in a way she couldn't process immediately, which is the way numbers land when they contradict a narrative you have spent years building your life around. 50, she said. 53 by the final count, the healer said. Lena looked at the ceiling. She felt something she didn't have an immediate name for, something that was adjacent to grief, not because anything terrible was currently happening, but the specific grief of someone who has been braced for impact for so long that the absence of impact is itself disorienting. The particular sadness of discovering that people had been willing to move, and you had not known it, that help had been possible, and you had not known that either. She pressed her lips together and did not cry, because she had taught herself not to cry in front of people, and the habit was deep. The door opened. Torin came in. She did not know his name yet. She would learn it. He was unremarkable to look at. Medium height, dark-haired. The kind of face that was pleasant without being striking. The kind of person you could overlook in a crowd. He had his cloak back now, the one he had wrapped around her in the square, and he was holding something. He held it out. Tea. The real kind, the warming kind. The kind that cost something to source properly. "They said you'd be awake by now," he said. She looked at the tea, looked at him. "Why did you do that?" she asked. He set the tea on the table beside her bed and sat down in the chair the healer had vacated. "Because it needed doing," he said. "That's not an answer." "It's the most accurate one I have," he said. "I've been watching what happens to you for a long time. I didn't do anything about it for a long time." A pause. "Today I did something about it. I don't have a more complicated explanation than that." She looked at him. "You could have been sanctioned," she said. "Standing against Brix." "I wasn't standing against Brix," he said. "I was standing between him and you. Those are different things." She was quiet for a moment. 53 people, she said. 53, he agreed. "Give or take. It happened fast. I didn't have time to count. You started it." He considered this. "I moved first. Whether I started it, or whether I was just the first person to do what most of them were already deciding to do." He paused. "I don't think that's mine to claim." She looked at him with the direct, undefended attention of someone who has spent so long making herself invisible that she has forgotten she doesn't have to anymore, and is now, carefully, in this specific warm room, with this specific cup of tea, beginning to remember. "Tell me your name," she said. "Torin," he said. "Torin Ashvale, mid-rank hunter. 3 years in Ironcliff. Previously, mostly irrelevant." A pause, hoping to change that last part. Something shifted in her chest. Not dramatically. Quietly, the way a frozen thing begins to thaw, gradually and then more rapidly than you expected. "Lena," she said. "I know," he said. "I know your name. I've known it for 2 years. That's one of the things I should have done something about sooner." He held her gaze steadily. "I'm sorry, for the time it took." She sat with this. The apology and what it meant. Not an apology for what Brix had done, but for his own silence. For the 2 years of knowing and not moving. She understood that distinction. She respected it. "Thank you," she said, "for moving today." "Yes," he said. "I'm going to keep moving. If you want that." She looked at him. She thought about 4 years. About Des, who had been kind and was gone. About the ice on the path that no one had sanded. About the specific loneliness of existing inside a community that had agreed not to see you, and the specific, strange, almost unbearable feeling of being seen. "I want that," she said. The Ironcliff Pack Council meeting 3 weeks later was the longest in 11 years. Doran Voss sat at the head of the table, which was where he always sat, but the quality of the session was different from any he had presided over before. The difference was difficult to articulate precisely, but was present in specific ways. The council members spoke in longer sentences. They contradicted each other more, and more directly. A woman named Seta, who had never spoken in a full council meeting before, made a formal motion regarding Omega housing allocation, and it passed. Doran listened to all of it. At the end of the session, he said, "The Northern Border Assessment needs completion by the end of the month. I'll need input from Torin Ashvale's hunting division on terrain mapping." He paused. "Also," he said, "I'll need a report on every Omega work assignment in the settlement. I want to review the equity of current allocations." The council was quiet. "Starting next week," he said. "Before the end of the month." He closed the session. Lena walked out of the healing house on the 7th day. Her legs were still not entirely reliable, and she walked with more care than usual, but she walked. Torin was outside, not waiting in a way that suggested he had been there long, but present in a way that suggested he had been paying attention to the timeline. He fell into step beside her without asking, which was the right decision. Asking would have made it a transaction. Walking was simply walking. She had moved from the outer ring accommodations. That had been Seta's motion. Emergency housing. Reassignment for Omegas, currently assigned to the uninsulated outer ring, pending the broader review. Lena's new quarters were in the middle ring, with a proper window and a hearth that actually worked. Small things. "Where are you going?" Torin asked. "The herb garden," she said. "I want to check what came up through the freeze. Mind if I come?" She looked at him sideways. "You know anything about herbs?" "Almost nothing," he said cheerfully. "But I'm a good student. Someone told me once that the best students make the best company." She did not quite smile, but the corners of her mouth moved in a direction that was adjacent to it. "Come on then," she said. They walked through the settlement together, in the ordinary morning light of a pack going about its ordinary day, the fires, the sounds of work and conversation, the children running patterns that only made sense to them. People looked. Some of them were the same people who had been watching on the morning in the square, and their watching now had a different quality to it. Not all of it was comfortable. Not all of it would be comfortable for a long time. Structures that have compacted over 20 years do not lighten in 3 weeks, and Lena was not the sort of person who pretended otherwise. But 53 people had moved. She had been braced against a wall for 4 years, and 53 people had put themselves between her and the wall. Not because she had asked, she would never have asked, but because asking, at some point, stops being the thing that matters. Because the only question that matters is whether you move when it's time to move. Torin had moved first, and after him, 52 more. That was not nothing. That was not a small thing. Lena was beginning to understand. As they walked through the Ironcliff settlement in the ordinary morning light, past the people who were learning to look at her differently, toward the herb garden where the frost had come and gone, and the things underneath it were still, quietly, alive. The beginning of the order of things, revised. The pack bullies thought they had finally won. They were looking at the wrong thing. They were watching her on the ground. They should have been watching the crowd. That is how it works sometimes. Not in grand declarations, in one person who moves, and then another, and then 50 more. Small things, carrying forward, becoming everything.